For 35 years, I was the daughter who didn't quite fit the one whose achievements went unnoticed, whose presence at family dinners felt like an inconvenience, whose very existence seemed to irritate everyone around her. But I never expected my own sister to hand me a wrapped box at my birthday dinner, lock eyes with me across the table, and say loud enough for everyone to hear, "Maybe this DNA test will finally explain why you've always been another man's mistake in this family." The laughter that followed still haunts me. Mom's wine glass trembling in her hand, Dad's chair scraping against the floor as he looked away. The way Lily's smile curled with satisfaction, not like someone telling a joke, but like someone springing a trap. I took that test, not because she wanted me to, but because I needed to know why she was so desperate for me to take it. 3 months later, our family's estate lawyer called an urgent meeting. When Mom and Lily walked in and saw me sitting there with my own attorney, their faces turned white as paper. They thought that DNA test would bury me. They didn't know it would uncover a secret that would destroy them instead, and reveal an irony so devastating that Lily's cruel words would haunt her forever. Have you ever discovered that the people who mocked you were hiding the very same truth about themselves? My name is Emily Carter. I'm 35 years old, a financial analyst who built her career through discipline and determination qualities I developed, because no one in my family ever believed I would amount to anything. While my younger sister Lily collected praise for simply existing, I learned early that my accomplishments would be met with silence at best, criticism at worst. The drive to my parents' house felt longer than usual that evening. 3 months had passed since Dad's funeral, and this would be my first time back for what Mom called a small birthday dinner. The autumn leaves were turning gold along the familiar streets, but nothing about this visit felt warm. Something in Mom's voice during her invitation had sounded strange, too bright, too rehearsed, as if she were reading lines someone else had written for her. When I walked through the front door, the first thing I noticed was laughter. Mom and Lily sat at the kitchen table, flipping through a vacation brochure discussing beach resorts and spa packages. 3 months after burying their husband and father, they were planning tropical getaways. I set down the bottle of wine I'd brought and waited for someone to acknowledge my presence. Mom finally looked up with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Lily didn't bother looking up at all. I tried asking about the will reading during appetizers. Dad had been gone for 3 months, far longer than any normal timeline for settling an estate. Mom's fork froze halfway to her mouth. "We're just not ready yet, sweetheart. Still processing everything." She glanced at Lily, who smoothly changed the subject to her recent promotion at work. I watched them exchange looks throughout the meal. Quick, nervous glances that seemed to carry entire conversations I wasn't meant to understand. Dinner revolved entirely around Lily, her children's achievements, her husband's new car, her plans to renovate their kitchen with custom Italian tile. When Mom finally turned to me, it was with a single question delivered between bites. "Still at that same accounting firm?" Before I could answer, Lily interrupted with another story about herself. But what struck me wasn't the familiar neglect. It was how Lily kept watching me, stealing glances with an expression I couldn't quite read. Anticipation, perhaps. Like someone waiting for a specific moment to arrive. Mom drank more wine than I'd ever seen her consume in one sitting, her eyes sliding away from mine every time I tried to make contact. Then came the gift. Lily slid a wrapped box across the table, her lips curving into a smile that made my skin prickle. "Happy birthday, Emily." I thought this might help answer some questions you've probably had your whole life. The wrapping paper fell away to reveal a DNA testing kit. Lily's smirk widened as the table erupted in uncomfortable laughter. "Maybe this will finally explain why you've always been so different from the rest of us. You should definitely send it in. Don't you want to know who you really are?" The words hung in the air like smoke. I noticed Mom's hands trembling around her wine glass, her knuckles white against the stem. Lily's joke had felt rehearsed, delivered with the precision of something practiced in front of a mirror many times. That night, I couldn't sleep. I found myself in my childhood bedroom, searching through boxes I hadn't touched in years. In the back of my closet, I discovered an envelope already opened, the contents carelessly stuffed back inside. The dust pattern around it had been disturbed recently. Someone else had been here searching through old secrets before me. Inside was a photograph of me as a baby, held by a man I had never seen before. On the back, in my mother's handwriting, "Forgive me." I photographed everything with my phone. Then I picked up the DNA kit Lily had given me and made a decision. I would send it not because my sister wanted me to, but because I needed to understand why she was so eager for me to discover I was different. Whatever trap she was setting, I intended to find it before it found me. I mailed the DNA kit the very next morning before I could talk myself out of it. The company promised results within 4 to 6 weeks, so I used that time to do my own research. I started with the photograph, the unknown man holding baby me, my mother's plea for forgiveness written on the back. I scanned his face for hours, searching for any resemblance to people my parents had known, but found nothing useful. The image quality was too poor for any meaningful analysis. So I waited and I watched, and I paid careful attention to every nervous pause in my mother's voice during our brief phone calls. The results arrived on a Tuesday afternoon, exactly 5 weeks after I had sent my sample. I was sitting at my desk during lunch when the email notification appeared. I opened it, expecting confirmation of what I had already begun to suspect, but what I found was both simpler and more complicated than anything I had imagined. The report stated clearly no biological relationship detected with the Carter family reference samples. The words sat on my screen like a verdict written in stone. I was not my father's daughter. The man who had raised me, who had paid for my education, who had walked me down the aisle at my first wedding and held my hand at my divorce hearing, he had known. He must have known. And he had kept me anyway, even if he had never quite managed to love me the way he loved Lily. But the report contained something else that made my breath catch in my throat. The DNA database had identified a genetic match, a connection to the family of a man named Richard Hayes. The system suggested he could be a close biological relative, possibly a father or uncle. The name meant nothing to me at first, so I did what any analyst would do when faced with an unknown variable. I researched. Richard Hayes had been a successful entrepreneur who built his fortune in commercial real estate during the 1980s and 90s. He had died 5 years ago, leaving behind a substantial estate and no publicly known immediate family. But what caught my attention was an article from 34 years ago, buried deep in an archived business journal. The headline announced that a local investor had saved a struggling manufacturing firm from bankruptcy. The firm was Carter Industries, my father's company. Richard Hayes had provided the capital that kept my family's business alive during its darkest period right around the time I was born. The pieces were beginning to form a picture I was not sure I wanted to see. That evening, I made a decision that would change everything. I took a screenshot of my DNA results and sent it to our family group chat with a single question. Anyone want to explain this? The reactions came quickly, and they told me everything I needed to know about who had been keeping secrets and who had been using them. Mom called within 3 minutes, her voice thick with tears and panic. She begged me to delete the message, to let sleeping dogs lie, to understand that some secrets were buried for very good reasons. She talked about how complicated things had been back then, how she had made mistakes she deeply regretted, how Dad had forgiven her, and they had all moved forward as a family. She never once apologized to me directly. She never acknowledged that I had spent 35 years feeling like a stranger in my own home because of a lie she had constructed and maintained. But it was Lily's response that confirmed my darkest suspicions. She didn't call. She didn't send a panicked voice message. She simply texted 4 words that chilled me to my core. Well, now you know. I guess that changes things, doesn't it? There was no shock in those words, no confusion, no sisterly concern, or even basic human sympathy, just cold, quiet satisfaction like someone watching the first domino fall in a long chain they had carefully arranged. Lily had expected this. Lily had wanted this. The DNA test was never just a cruel birthday joke, it was step 1 of something much larger. But step 1 toward what I called her that night, demanding answers. The conversation started tense and escalated into something ugly within minutes. I pushed hard, asking why she had given me the test, what she was really after, what game she thought she was playing with my life. For a while, Lily maintained her composure, deflecting my questions with practiced ease. But I kept pushing, and eventually her mask cracked. Her voice rose to a near scream as years of resentment came pouring out. I have protected this family's secrets for 20 years. 20 years of keeping my mouth shut while you got to play the innocent victim while everyone felt sorry for poor, overlooked Emily. And now I am going to make sure the right people get what they deserve. The line went dead before I could respond. But those words echoed in my mind for hours afterward, rearranging everything I thought I understood about my family. 20 years. Lily had discovered the truth when she was 16 years old. She must have overheard something, a phone call, a conversation, a confession meant for someone else's ears. And instead of confronting our parents or telling me she had chosen to weaponize that knowledge for her own benefit, every special privilege, every financial gift, every instance where Mom took Lily's side over mine, none of it had been about love. It had been payment. My sister had been blackmailing our mother for 2 decades, extracting favors and money and preferential treatment as the price of her silence. But something had changed. Lily no longer wanted to keep the secret buried. She wanted it exposed. And her words about making sure the right people get what they deserve told me this was about something much bigger than family drama. This was about money. This was about inheritance. This was about whatever Dad had left behind. I started asking careful questions to people outside our immediate family, old friends of my parents, neighbors who had known us for decades, business associates who remembered the early days of Carter Industries. What I learned made my blood run cold. One of my mother's oldest friends mentioned, almost as an afterthought, that Lily had been asking about inheritance lawyers several months ago, before Dad had even received his terminal diagnosis. Another family friend recalled Lily talking about upcoming changes to the family situation at a dinner party last spring, speaking with strange confidence about things she had no business knowing. A third mentioned that Lily had been unusually interested in the details of estate law, asking questions that seemed oddly specific for someone with no legal background. I couldn't prove anything concrete. I had no documents, no recordings, no smoking gun that would hold up in any court. But I had spent my entire career analyzing financial patterns, identifying risks that others dismissed, preparing for scenarios that seemed unlikely until they weren't. My instincts had never failed me in business, and every single one of them was screaming that I was walking into a trap. I found an attorney the next day, not a family friend, not someone connected to anyone my mother or sister might know, but an independent estate lawyer with a reputation for protecting clients in complicated inheritance disputes. I explained my concerns, shared what little concrete information I had, and asked her to help me understand my legal rights. She listened without judgment, took detailed notes, and promised to do some quiet research on my behalf. The call from a different lawyer came 3 days later. This one was from Mr. Harrison, the attorney, who had handled my father's legal affairs for over 30 years. His voice was formal but not unkind as he explained why he was reaching out. Emily, there are things your father wanted you to know, things he instructed me to share only under very specific circumstances. Those circumstances have now been met. It's time for the official will reading, and I believe you should be prepared for what you're going to hear. I agreed to attend the reading scheduled for the following week. Then I called my own attorney and asked her to accompany me. Whatever trap Lily had spent months constructing, I was about to walk straight into it, but this time I would not be walking in blind. The law office of Harrison and Associates occupied the entire top floor of a building that had stood in downtown for over 50 years. I arrived 20 minutes early with my attorney Sarah Chen, who had advised me to observe everything carefully and speak only when directly addressed. We took seats near the window, away from the main conference table, and waited for the others to arrive. Mom came through the door first, looking as though she had aged a decade in the past month. Her face was pale, her hands clutched her purse like it was the only thing keeping her upright, and she refused to meet my eyes as she took a seat at the far end of the long table. She knew something was coming. The question was whether she understood exactly what. Lily swept in 5 minutes before the scheduled time, and the transformation in her demeanor confirmed everything I had suspected. She was practically glowing with anticipation, dressed in her most expensive suit, her makeup flawless, her smile barely contained. She had brought her own attorney, a sharp-faced man I recognized from billboards advertising aggressive estate litigation throughout the city. Lily positioned herself front and center at the table, checking her phone repeatedly, texting someone with quick, excited fingers. When she caught my eye across the room, she gave me a look of such smug satisfaction that my stomach tightened into a knot. She believed she had already won. She was absolutely certain that today would be my destruction. Mr. Harrison entered last, carrying a thick folder that he placed deliberately at the center of the conference table. He was a man in his late 60s, distinguished and methodical, someone who had known my family for longer than I had been alive. But today his expression carried something I had never seen in all the years I had known him. Quiet resolve, like a man about to deliver news he had been preparing to share for a very long time. He sat down, adjusted his glasses, and looked around the room at each of us in turn. Before we proceed, he began, his voice cutting through the tension like a blade, I want to note that Mr. Carter gave me very specific instructions about how this reading should be conducted. He anticipated certain challenges to his final wishes, and he prepared accordingly. Everything I am about to share was arranged by your father during the final months of his life with full knowledge of circumstances that some of you may find surprising. I watched Lily's smile falter slightly at those words. This was not how she had expected things to begin. Mr. Harrison opened the folder and began reading in a clear, steady voice. I, Robert James Carter, being of sound mind and body, declare this to be my last will and testament. I leave 70% of my estate, including the family home, my investment portfolio, and my controlling stake in Carter Industries, to Emily Carter, the daughter I chose to love not because of blood, but because of character. Lily was on her feet before he finished the sentence, her chair scraping loudly against the floor. This is exactly what I expected. She shouted, her composure shattering completely. She is not his real daughter. We have DNA proof now. She waved her phone in the air triumphantly. I have the test results right here. She submitted them herself. She has no legal claim to any of this inheritance. Mr. Harrison waited for her outburst to subside, his expression unchanged. Then he continued reading, his voice calm and absolutely devastating. The will states, and I quote directly, I have known since Emily was 2 years old that she is not my biological child. I chose to raise her anyway, and I choose to leave her my legacy because she alone has proven worthy of it. Blood has never been what mattered in this family. Character has, and Emily's character has never been in question. The color drained from Lily's face so quickly I thought she might collapse. Her phone slipped from her fingers and clattered onto the table. Her entire strategy, the DNA test, the months of preparation, the careful exposure of my parentage had just been rendered completely meaningless by a single paragraph. Dad had known the truth all along. He had always known, and he had chosen me anyway. Mom began crying softly at the end of the table, her shoulders shaking with quiet sobs, but I could not tell if her tears were from grief, guilt, or fear of what was still to come. Mr. Harrison was not finished. He reached for a thick folder at the bottom of his stack and placed it on the table with deliberate weight. 8 months before his death, after Lily began pressuring him to modify the will in her favor, Mr. Carter hired a private investigator. He instructed this investigator to document any activities that might indicate attempts to manipulate the estate distribution. He slid the folder across the table toward Lily, who stared at it as if it might reach up and bite her. The report documents the following findings. Mr. Harrison continued, his voice taking on a harder edge. Consultations with 3 separate estate litigation attorneys beginning 7 months before Mr. Carter's death. Unauthorized withdrawals, totaling $50,000 from Mr. Carter's personal accounts during the period of his illness. Multiple conversations with family friends regarding upcoming changes to the family situation and making sure the right people get what they deserve. And finally, he paused, letting the weight of the moment build. The purchase of a DNA testing kit bought online 3 weeks before Emily's birthday, shipped directly to Lily's home address, and gift-wrapped for presentation at a family dinner. He placed a handwritten note on the table, my father's familiar script written in the shaky hand of a man who knew his time was running out. Mr. Carter asked that I read this message aloud. Lily, I knew what you were planning. I watched you scheme and manipulate for months, hoping you would change course. I gave you every opportunity to choose differently. You did not. These consequences are entirely of your own making. The silence that followed was absolute. Even Lily's attorney seemed frozen by the thoroughness of the trap that had been laid. Then Lily found her voice, though it had lost all its earlier confidence. I am contesting this will, she announced her words, tumbling out in desperate fury. This is obviously manipulation. Emily must have influenced him during his illness. I will take this to court. Her own attorney grabbed her arm and whispered urgently into her ear. I caught fragments of his warning, explicitly acknowledges, cannot claim fraud when disclosed. Any challenge will be frivolous. Lily shook him off violently. Mr. Harrison responded without a trace of emotion. The will contains a no contest clause valid under California law. Any heir who files a challenge without probable cause forfeits their entire remaining inheritance. Additionally, your $200,000 in outstanding loans from Mr. Carter are documented in these files as advances on your inheritance. If you forfeit your inheritance through a frivolous challenge, these advances convert immediately to personal debts owed to the estate. Lily's attorney, the sharp-faced man from the billboards, slowly closed his briefcase with a soft click. He did not look at Lily. He did not offer words of comfort or legal strategy. Instead, as he walked toward the door, he paused beside my chair. His eyes met mine, and in his expression I saw something I had not expected: respect. "Miss Carter," he said quietly, "your father was a remarkably thorough man." Then he walked out of the conference room without looking back, leaving Lily standing alone amid the wreckage of every scheme she had spent months constructing. She had set a trap meant to destroy me. She had not realized she was standing in it herself the entire time. The weeks following the will reading should have brought some measure of peace. Instead, they brought chaos of a kind I had never experienced. Lily refused to accept what had happened in that conference room. Her first attorney had abandoned her case and walked out without looking back, but she found another lawyer willing to take her money. A man desperate enough for clients that he ignored every red flag waving in his face. Together they filed a formal contest against the will, claiming I had manipulated our dying father during his final months. But Lily did not stop at legal action. 3 days after the filing, she appeared at my apartment building in the middle of the evening, pounding on my door with both fists, screaming threats loud enough for every neighbor on my floor to hear. "You're a fraud, a thief. You stole what belongs to me, and I will destroy everything you have." Her voice was raw with rage, her words slurring slightly in a way that suggested she had been drinking. She did not notice the security camera mounted above my door, standard equipment for the building with its clearly posted sign reading, "Recording in progress." She did not notice my neighbor across the hall watching through her peephole phone, already in hand to call the police. Lily saw nothing except her own fury, and she let it pour out of her for nearly 15 minutes before building security escorted her away. The mandatory mediation hearing took place 6 weeks later in a courthouse conference room that smelled of old coffee and disappointment. Lily arrived with her new attorney, a nervous man who kept shuffling papers and avoiding eye contact with anyone. I arrived with Sarah Chen, who carried a folder so thick it required both hands to lift. When the mediator asked us to present our positions, Sarah went first. She laid out the complete picture with devastating precision, the private investigator's report, documenting Lily's scheme from its earliest stages, the security footage of her threatening visit to my apartment, dozens of harassing text messages she had sent in the weeks since the will reading, and the documented 20-year pattern of emotional blackmail against our mother. The mediator's expression shifted from professional neutrality to barely concealed disgust as the evidence mounted. She dismissed the contest as frivolous within the hour and invoked the no contest clause without hesitation. Lily forfeited her remaining 30% of the inheritance. The $200,000 in outstanding loans converted immediately to personal debt owed to the estate. In a single afternoon, my sister went from expecting to inherit everything to owing more money than her house was worth. Mom appeared at my apartment that evening, looking smaller and older than I had ever seen her. She did not wait for an invitation. She simply walked past me when I opened the door, sat down on my couch, and began talking in a voice barely above a whisper. Finally, after 35 years of silence, she was ready to tell me the whole truth. Richard Hayes was not a stranger who had briefly passed through her life. He was my father's closest friend since their college years, the best man at my parents' wedding, a man who had loved our family deeply in his own complicated way. When doctors told Robert Carter he was infertile, the news nearly destroyed their marriage. My parents separated for almost a year, during which time Mom found comfort and companionship with Richard. When she discovered she was pregnant with me, the three of them made an impossible decision together. Richard would step away completely, never claiming me as his own. Robert would raise me as his daughter, giving me his name and his protection, and Richard would help save Carter Industries, which was failing at the time. 2 attorneys witnessed the agreement, Mr. Harrison for my parents, and another lawyer for Richard. Then Mom's voice dropped even lower, and what she said next made the room feel like it was tilting beneath my feet. "But that's not everything, Emily. There's something else I've never told anyone. 3 years after I was born, during another difficult period in her marriage, Mom had another affair. Brief, meaningless, a moment of weakness she had spent decades trying to forget. When I got pregnant with Lily, I knew immediately that she couldn't be Robert's child. He was still infertile. Nothing had changed. I stared at her, unable to form words. Robert knew. She continued, tears streaming down her face. He always knew. But he chose to raise both of you anyway. He just could never love Lily the same way he loved you. Not because of the blood, because of who she became, and I think Lily sensed that difference her whole life. It's why she was so desperate to prove she belonged more than you did. She was fighting for something she never actually had. The irony was so bitter I could taste it. Lily had spent months planning to expose me as another man's child. She had mocked me with those exact words at my own birthday dinner, and she had no idea that she was describing herself. Mr. Harrison called the next day to explain the final piece of the 35-year-old agreement. Richard Hayes had established a trust in my name, designed with specific trigger conditions. The trust would activate if my parentage was ever formally acknowledged in legal proceedings or referenced in Robert Carter's will. The will reading had satisfied that condition, automatically notifying Richard's attorney. Richard had died 5 years ago, but he spent decades building this trust and watching me from a distance. His letter arrived with the legal documents, and reading it made me weep in a way I had not wept since childhood. He wrote about watching my graduations from the back of crowded auditoriums, tracking my career through public records, observing how I was treated by the family he had helped create. He saw me struggle. He saw me overlooked. He saw me build myself into someone strong, despite receiving so little support. His letter said, "This was not guilt, it was pride. I was his greatest accomplishment, even though I never knew he existed." As I processed everything, I realized I now held a weapon I had never asked for. I knew the truth about Lily. I could demand she take a DNA test. I could expose that the sister who mocked me as another man's mistake was herself exactly that. I could watch her entire identity crumble the way she had tried to crumble mine. I considered it for exactly 10 seconds. Then I closed the folder and put it away. I would not tell her. I would not use this information against her. Lily had already destroyed herself completely. I did not need to add to the wreckage. And unlike my sister, I did not need to watch someone else suffer to know my own worth. For the $50,000 Lily had stolen from Dad's accounts during his illness, I offered her a choice through my attorney: repay it within 1 year or face criminal prosecution for elder financial abuse. Her decision, her consequences. Combined with the debt she already owed and the inheritance she had forfeited, Lily would have to sell her house and start over from nothing. But she would not go to prison. For Mom, I established a modest monthly allowance from the estate. Enough to cover her basic needs, not enough to maintain the lifestyle she had enjoyed while ignoring one daughter and enabling another. She asked me through tears why I was not angrier. My answer was simple. You saw Richard every time you looked at me. You saw your biggest mistake, and you punished me for it my entire life. I understand now why you couldn't love me, but understanding is not forgiveness. This is what boundaries look like. In Richard Hayes's package, beneath all the legal documents and the letter explaining 35 years of watching from afar, there was one more thing, a small wooden box I had not yet opened. I was not ready. But I knew that whatever was inside represented a lifetime of love from a father who chose to stay away so I could have a family. Even if that family had never deserved me. And even if the sister who called me another man's mistake never knew she was one herself. The wooden box sat on my nightstand for 3 months before I found the courage to open it. Every morning I would look at it while drinking my coffee. Every night I would touch its worn surface before turning off the lamp. But I could not bring myself to lift the lid and see what was inside. Whatever Richard Hayes had left me represented 35 years of choices I was only beginning to understand, a lifetime of love from a man who had watched me from a distance I never knew existed. I needed to be ready. The morning I finally opened the box was unremarkable in every way except what it meant to me. A quiet Sunday in early spring, coffee growing cold on the nightstand, sunlight streaming through windows I had chosen myself. I lifted the lid slowly, my hands trembling, and discovered something simple and profound, resting on faded velvet. An old watch. Well worn, clearly treasured, the leather band softened by decades of daily use. The face was simple and elegant, the kind of timepiece a man wears not to impress others, but to mark the hours of his own life. Beneath the watch lay a folded note written in handwriting I had never seen before, but somehow recognized as belonging to me. I wore this every day, Emily. Every time I checked it, I thought of you. I wondered if you were happy, if you were loved, if the family I helped you have was treating you the way you deserved. The answer to those first two questions was often no, and I couldn't interfere. That was the price of my promise, the cost of giving you a family I hoped would love you better than they did. I was wrong about them. But I was never wrong about you. Robert watched over you too, in his way. We never spoke about you after the agreement was signed, but I know he loved you. I could see it in the way he looked at you the rare times I allowed myself to observe from a distance. Two men, Emily. Neither of us had any obligation to love you, and both of us chose to anyway. You were never another man's mistake. You were the best thing two flawed men ever did. Let this watch count the hours of the life you deserve, the life you've earned, the life I always knew you'd build for yourself. I held the watch against my chest and finally let myself cry. Not tears of grief or anger, but something deeper, the release of 35 years of feeling invisible, unworthy, fundamentally wrong. I had spent my entire life believing something was broken inside me, that I was less deserving of love than everyone around me. Now I understood the truth. I was not unloved. I was loved by two fathers who both chose me when they had no obligation to do so. The weight I had carried since childhood was not proof of my inadequacy. It was simply the price of a promise made before I was born by a man who loved me enough to let me go. I sold the Carter family home within weeks. I did not attend the final walkthrough or take anything from the rooms where I had grown up, feeling like a stranger. Too many memories lived in those walls, and none of them were warm. The money from the sale, combined with inheritances from both my fathers, gave me options I had never imagined. But I did not want a mansion or luxury cars or any status symbols that had mattered to the family I was leaving behind. I bought a cottage instead, small, old, slightly worn, very much like me. It had a garden neglected for years, full of potential, waiting to be coaxed back to life. I filled the rooms with books I had always wanted to read, plants that needed patient care, sunlight, that poured through windows I never had to share. The first night I slept there, I lay in darkness, listening to silence, and realized I had never known true peace before. Only the absence of conflict, which is not the same thing. For the first time in 35 years, every decision was mine alone. No one to please, no one to prove wrong, no one measuring my worth against standards I could never meet. My relationship with Mom settled into something minimal but manageable. Monthly phone calls, brief conversations about weather and health, and nothing that mattered. No holidays together. No pretending we were close. The distance between us was not punishment. It was the natural consequence of decades of choices she had made. She had to live with the knowledge that her secrets and favoritism had created a gap that could never be closed. With Lily, there was nothing at all. I did not answer her calls or respond to her messages. When she was forced to sell her house to cover debts, she sent me a letter begging for help. She promised she had changed. She swore she finally understood. She pleaded for one more chance. I read the letter once, then dropped it in the trash without feeling anything. Not anger, not satisfaction, just nothing. Lily's ruin was not revenge I had orchestrated. It was simply what happens when a lifetime of manipulation finally meets a wall it cannot charm or scheme through. I owed her nothing, not even the energy required for hatred. I never told her the truth about her own parentage. That secret went with me unused. Unlike my sister, I did not need to destroy someone else to feel whole. Using resources from both fathers, I established the Hayes Carter Foundation. It provides therapy scholarships for adults healing from toxic family dynamics, career mentoring for those rebuilding their lives after escaping manipulation, and emergency support for anyone needing help getting out. Every person it helps will be proof that pain can become purpose, that wounds can become wisdom, that the unfavored child can grow up to spread love in ways her family never imagined. I sit in my garden now as the sun sets, wearing Richard's watch, a book closed, on my lap. My cottage glows warm behind me. Ducks have settled on the small pond at the edge of my property. I am not waiting for anyone. I am not trying to prove anything. I am not healing anymore. I am healed. I look at the watch and think about what Lily said that night at my birthday dinner. Another man's mistake. She meant those words to wound me, to mark me as less than to prove I did not belong. But Lily was wrong about everything. I was not a mistake. I was a choice made by Richard Hayes, who gave up the chance to know me so I could have a family. A choice made by Robert Carter, who raised me knowing the truth and loved me anyway. Two fathers who both looked at a child who was not theirs by blood and decided she is mine anyway. My sister called me another man's mistake and gave me a DNA test to prove I did not belong. Instead, it proved that two fathers, one who raised me knowing the truth, one who watched me from afar for 35 years, both chose me when they did not have to. Lily wanted to expose that I was not a Carter by blood. She never knew she was not one either, but I kept her secret, because unlike her, I do not need someone else's pain to know my own worth. In the end, the greatest inheritance was not the money or the property. It was finally understanding that I was always worthy of love. I just had to stop waiting for the wrong people to see it. Emily's story carries a truth that many of us need to hear. Your worth is not determined by how your family treats you. The people who should love you unconditionally sometimes fail you the deepest, and that failure reflects their character, not yours. If you grew up feeling invisible, overlooked, or like you never quite belonged, please understand this. Their inability to see your value was their blindness, not your flaw. This story also teaches us that manipulation and cruelty eventually collapse under their own weight. Lily spent 20 years building schemes and weaponizing secrets, believing she was securing her future. Instead, she was constructing her own destruction. The truth always finds a way to surface, and those who build their lives on lies find themselves with nothing solid left when it does. Perhaps most importantly, Emily showed us that healing does not require revenge. She had the power to destroy Lily completely, but chose boundaries over bitterness. Sometimes the greatest victory is simply walking away whole and building a beautiful life on your own terms. If this story touched your heart, please subscribe to this channel so you never miss another powerful story like this one. Leave a comment below and share your thoughts. Have you ever discovered a family secret that changed everything? Or have you had to establish boundaries with people who should have loved you better? Your stories matter, and we would love to hear them.